All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you look at the massive 2,000-year history of Germany, what you're really watching is an epic, highly dramatic quest for unity. It's the story of a region trying to figure out its identity over millennia, transitioning from deeply fragmented factions into the singular powerhouse we know today. To wrap our heads around this huge timeline, we've broken it down into 6 main chapters. We'll go from the early tribes and the Roman Empire, right through the fragmented Middle Ages, check out the rise of Prussia, navigate the world wars, and finally end up at a reunited modern nation. So, Chapter 1, Tribes and the Roman Empire and that early cultural divide. Long before any united nation was even a thought, this region was basically defined by a massive clash. Picture this, it's 9 AD, and the supposedly unstoppable Roman Empire hits a literal wall. In the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, a coalition of Germanic tribes actually ambushes and completely annihilates 3 entire Roman legions. It's wild. This was a catastrophic defeat that forced Rome to just fix its borders at the Rhine and Danube rivers and totally abandon hopes of conquering Germania. Then fast forward to the migration period in the 5th century, and we've got Germanic peoples moving west to carve out new homelands while the Roman Empire collapses. Eventually, the Frankish king Charlemagne brings a bunch of these tribes together, expanding his territory so much that by 800 AD, he's actually crowned Emperor of the Romans, kind of symbolically resurrecting that old imperial title. It really is a tale of 2 completely different worlds here. On one side, you've got the expanding Roman Empire, right? They have established cities, written language, a whole system of coinage. But then on the other side, you have the Germanic tribes. These were fierce, unsettled farming communities led by warrior elites who worshipped gods like Odin and Thor. And even though some Roman influence definitely seeped across the border, think pottery and trade goods, the tribes largely kept their distinct, untamed way of life. Moving on to Chapter 2, Faith, Fire, and Fragmentation. The medieval patchwork. Now, as we head into the Middle Ages, we run into the so-called Holy Roman Empire, and this perfectly illustrates just how fragmented this region really was. You kind of have to think of it less as a single unified country and way more like a massive, messy group project. It was a sprawling conglomeration of semi-independent duchies, counties, bishoprics, and free cities. Sure, they were loosely bound by a common emperor, but the real, day-to-day power, that usually lay with the hundreds of regional princes. And then, a monk named Martin Luther comes along and drives the ultimate wedge into this already fragile system. In 1517, he calls out the abuses of the Catholic Church, and thanks to Gutenberg's newly invented printing press, which was essentially the internet of the 16th century, Luther's ideas went incredibly viral. This completely split the empire along religious lines. You had the northern and eastern princes embracing these new Protestant ideas, while the southern and western regions remained fiercely loyal to Catholicism. And the result? Decades of absolutely brutal religious civil war. Just take a second to let this massive number sink in. 4.5 to 8 million. That is the catastrophic death toll of the 30 Years' War, which kicked off in 1618. We're talking about marauding armies causing a staggering loss of life through battle, famine, and disease. By the time it finally ended in 1648, some German regions had literally lost over half of their entire population. It's just devastating. And the peace treaty that followed, it really just locked in that decentralized structure of the hundreds of little principalities scattered across the map. All right, Chapter 3, The Rise of Prussia, the emergence of a fierce rivalry. So, by the 18th century, this bitter competition takes center stage. On one hand, you have Habsburg Austria. They were the old, established, sprawling, multi-ethnic realm based in Vienna that had been providing the Holy Roman Emperors. But rising up to challenge them was Hohenzollern Prussia, based out of Berlin. They were rapidly transforming from this middling border state into a highly disciplined, modernized military powerhouse. Under super astute leaders like Frederick the Great, Prussia actively started upending the balance of power in Europe through some pretty audacious wars. Eventually, Napoleon Bonaparte rolls through Europe, completely dissolving that 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire. When the dust finally settles from all that, the 1815 Congress of Vienna consolidated those hundreds of messy German lands down to just 39 sovereign states, forming a new German confederation. Now, it was still a patchwork, for sure, but the fragmentation was shrinking significantly, and a real tangible sentiment of German nationalism was finally starting to take root. Which brings us to Chapter 4, Blood, Iron, and Empire, Forging a Unified Nation. This centuries-old quest for unity finally reaches its violent climax under the Prussian statesman Otto von Bismarck. And he didn't use democratic assemblies to get it done. He used deliberate, ruthless force. In a lightning-fast series of wars, Bismarck systematically knocked out the obstacles standing in the way of a Prussian-led Germany. Step 1. In 1864, he defeats Denmark to seize the northern duchies. Step 2. In 1866, he defeats Austria, definitively sidelining them from German affairs. And finally, in 1870, he actually provokes and stunningly defeats France, capturing Emperor Napoleon III. This massive shared victory is what finally rallied the remaining southern German states to join Prussia in a single political union. Right after the unified German Empire was officially proclaimed at the Palace of Versailles in 1871, Bismarck completely flips his strategy. He famously declares Germany a satiated power, basically saying, "We have enough territory." He suddenly shifts from conqueror to playing peacekeeper, crafting these incredibly complex alliances just to protect their new borders and preserve stability across Europe. But this new era wasn't just about military might. By 1900, the newly unified Germany was industrializing at breakneck speed. Rich in coal and iron, it rapidly became one of the world's leading industrial powers, totally rivaling Britain and the US. Plus, it was an era of immense intellectual brilliance. They produced scientific icons like Albert Einstein and legendary composers like Brahms. Politically, they even pioneered some of the world's very first modern social welfare programs, setting up things like health insurance and old age pensions. Now we hit Chapter 5, World Wars and Division. The collapse of the empire. Unfortunately, that golden age takes a sharp, incredibly dark turn. A young Kaiser Wilhelm II's aggressive imperial ambitions end up plunging the nation into catastrophe. In 1914, strained alliances ignite the First World War. Then, out of the ashes of that defeat, the struggling democratic Weimar Republic is born in 1919, heavily weighed down by the punitive Treaty of Versailles. Just as they start to find their footing, the Great Depression strikes in 1929. This absolutely cripples the economy and creates a severe crisis, which leads directly to Adolf Hitler being appointed chancellor in 1933, setting the grim stage for the Second World War. Exploiting that profound economic despair and the deep resentment over the Versailles Treaty, the radical right-wing Nazi Party rapidly dismantled the democracy. They established a totalitarian regime under Adolf Hitler. Driven by extreme nationalism, militarism, and a horrific racial ideology, the regime executed systematic persecution and genocide, resulting in the unimaginable atrocities of the Holocaust. Furthermore, their aggressive territorial expansion entirely dismantled the post-World War I order and pushed Europe back into total war. Following Germany's unconditional surrender in 1945, the unified nation was basically erased from the map. As the Cold War set in, the country fractured into two starkly opposed universes. On the one side, you had West Germany, a capitalist, liberal democratic federal republic. And on the other, East Germany, a Soviet-backed communist dictatorship calling itself a democratic republic. And the ultimate physical symbol of this divide was the Berlin Wall. Constructed in 1961, it literally sealed off West Berlin to stop East Germans from fleeing to seek freedom. It perfectly encapsulated the ideological division of the Iron Curtain. Just imagine a wall going up overnight to seal off your own city. For nearly 4 decades, the fragmentation that had plagued Germany's ancient history returned, but this time as a literal, concrete barrier. Finally, Chapter 6, Reunited and Reinvented, the Fall of the Wall. By the late 1980s, an economy in stagnation and a deep, powerful desire for freedom sparked massive, peaceful protests all across East Germany. And then, it all unraveled incredibly fast. On November 9, 1989, the East German government finally relented, and the Berlin Wall jubilantly fell. It was an amazing moment. Within less than a year, in 1990, the fractured country was formally knitted back together, achieving full German reunification. And today, it's Europe's largest economy. Today, that successfully reunified Germany stands out on the global stage, but not for military might. Instead, they are celebrated for highly advanced engineering, their massive automotive industries, and for taking a profoundly turbulent past and transforming it into a role as a peaceful global leader. Which leaves us with a final thought to wrap up this explainer. How does a 2,000-year struggle from scattered pagan tribes fighting off Romans to being the literal epicenter of the Cold War shape a nation's identity as a peaceful leader today? It's a fascinating lens through which to view not just Germany, but the making of the modern world.